This episode of Around the Layout is powered by Rapido Trains.
Buying Rapido Trains will make you happy.
Rapido's going back to the 90s for the return of the Mac. SD70 Macs in both HO and N scale in variations you've never seen before. Whether it's coal or racks, you need a 70 Mac. Check out all of the details at rapidotrains.com. Looking for that locomotive, freight car, structure, or detail part you just can't seem to find? Check out Spring Creek Model Trains. With a huge selection from today's top manufacturers, Spring Creek is a destination for model railroaders looking for what's next. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, online at springcreekmodeltrains.com, or at train shows throughout the country, stop by and say wow. Attention Proto Throttle users. If you've ever wanted to have your throttle fit more comfortably in your hand and change the batteries without removing the throttle's case, now you can. Introducing the Narrow Throttle, a new product developed by Scott Thornton that reduces the size of the Proto Throttle by over 25%. Log on to narrowthrottle.square.site to learn more. That's narrowthrottle.square.site. Enjoy more comfort and never have to open the case again. Don't miss the annual New Haven Railroad Convention and Train Show, September 11th through 13th in New London, Connecticut, presented by the New Haven Railroad Historical and Technical Association. Learn more about them and this exciting event on their website, nhrhta.org. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott, so glad you could join us. Model railroading delivers so many amazing things, and one of them, the community and the people that you meet and the relationships and the techniques, the skills, the abilities, all of that mixed into amazing stuff that it brings to each and every one of us, and that'll be our topic on this episode. And joining me for that, Dr. Mini himself, Bernard Hellen. Bernard, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Ray. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic and finally catching up. It was a whirlwind July into August, and I know you've been quite busy as well.
It's been unbelievably busy. I can't believe we're almost into September, almost starting the unofficial start of model railroad season. What a summer it's been.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind. I know travel and then other events going on, and it's just been a lot. And I know you've been quite busy. Start with a move. I mean, I got to see the old miniprints headquarters not too long ago. Now I got to get back up there to see the new miniprints headquarters.
Well, the new miniprints headquarters is significantly bigger. It's double the size of the old one. It's in a much better location, although it's only a kilometer north, a 5-minute, maybe 10-minute walk north of where we used to be. We're now right on the CPKC mainline. So we have mainline freight action right outside our front door. So you come visit us at Miniature Printerland, there is a very good chance that we will be sitting trackside watching very large freights go by.
I know you're interested in eventually scaling up your business. Is there a siding there so you can start loading boxcars full of mini print stuff?
There might be on the module we're about to build. So yes, we're going to need giant tank cars of resin, mini prints resin tank cars coming up right beside the building. Well, the building, interestingly, used to be rail served. It was an old Wilkinson plow factory in the late 1800s. Then it became Union Felt, a felt company in the 20s and 30s. So there's a very rich industrial rail heritage and some amazing photographs that I will be sharing on my next Mini Prints Monthly Live, which is actually coming up September 2nd. So I enjoy going deep into the urban archaeology of the area.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll share the links to your Mini Prints Live on our show notes, aroundthelayout.com/252. And I know that whole area was full of history. You were kind enough to give me the nickel tour or what's it, Toonie, Looney? I don't know when they named something tour, but
well, neither of us have pennies anymore, so it's not the 2-cent tour.
Right.
So.
That's right. So, but got to see the historical area. That's really cool. And it was if you're ever up in the Toronto area, definitely need to reach out to Dr. Minnie and get the historical Toronto tour there. That was really cool to get.
Yeah, we saw a train too. We were lucky. So we were standing at the Oslo Street crossing, and my new space is just, maybe 600 feet from there. And the minute we got there, a train went by. So that's exactly, you were right. You were seconds from the new miniature world headquarters. So I'm really looking forward to that. That's the fun part for me too, is producing as a model railroader, producing model railroad details. You can't forget about the railroad. And to see the actual prototype go by every day is part of the fun.
Absolutely. Great scenery out the window for sure. To be able to do that and tie it all together. And I mentioned going up to Toronto. You came down to Chattanooga. That's where I saw you last at the National Train Show and the NMRA National Convention. Talk about your trip down to Chattanooga.
That was a ton of fun. Apart from the airline, I decided that it would be faster to fly than to drive. I didn't really relish a 13-hour drive, which, for me is 2 days. I'm not a road warrior that's just going to plow through. So I figured, you know what? I'll be kind to my body. I will, hop on a Delta flight and just whip down and be there in no time at all. Well, would you believe that with all the flight delays and aircraft maintenance, it took me exactly 13 hours to fly down. So apart from that, I won't be flying anymore. I will definitely be driving. But apart from getting there, what a great convention. Such a fantastic opportunity to meet up with old friends, make new friends. And there were a lot of new friends made sitting around the bar, drinking old fashions, some fantastic clinics. Really interesting clinics. Really enjoyed watching Jerry Leone and, of course, so many fantastic clinicians, Tony Custer, and, just really interesting clinics. But the real main event for me for going down there was to deliver a clinic myself and launch Miniprints University, which is the big announcement that I guess you have the world exclusive to, because I have not talked about it on any other podcast yet. So this will be the first time, I think, that we really, other than in my own Miniprints communications, talk about this new initiative. And Chattanooga was really where it all started, because the clinic that I delivered, which is affectionately called Model Trains Can Save Your Life, otherwise known as Why Do We Model, is the topic of this podcast.
Yeah, for sure. And that's great. You had that opportunity to do it at the national convention with the NMRA. And now this is where I should have recorded that stinger, that Around the Layout podcast exclusive. I should have that button, right, to push and have that.
I think you just did. There you go.
I think maybe I'll have to pull that one. Yeah, I'll just have to pull that one back. But
yeah,
no, that's awesome. I appreciate you coming on and telling us all about this. Let's start at the beginning of all of this concept. Where does this idea of even taking it to a clinic start?
Well, I started Miniprints because I needed a beaver for my layout. That's where it all started. 6 years ago, I couldn't find a beaver, and I somehow became a model railroad manufacturer. And as you know, over the last 6 years, Miniprints has grown substantially, and we make thousands, probably about 6,000 people, details, animals, figures, you name it, for model railroad layouts. But I've always been very interested in the why. Why do we do things? There are a lot of fantastic YouTube videos and clinics and resources on how to do things. I mean, if you go to Google or you go to YouTube and you type in how to weather a gravel road, how to paint a boxcar, how to install a turnout, there is no shortage of how-tos. But I don't think that a lot of people are talking about the why. And the why interests me. Now, maybe it just interests me, or I was concerned that maybe it just interested me. So I like to go down the rabbit hole. I mean, we've talked about on this podcast, super detailing. And I've gone down the rabbit hole before and talked about, why do we do what we do with the super detailing? So that's always been something that interested me. But one of the things that I wanted to explore was, we all know that hobbies are good for us. It's sort of generally accepted that the hobby is good for you. It'll prolong your life. It'll make you happier. But I wanted to figure out the why. What is the science behind that? So it started off as an exploration for myself. I had a theory. My working hypothesis was that miniprints will save your life. And I wanted to prove that. And I'm happy to say that after about 6 months of research, I can definitively state that it is true. Model railroading as a hobby is incredibly good for you, both psychologically and physically. And now we have the proof.
We've definitely have dived into that topic before, well, not only with you and obviously the rabbit hole stuff, but even the mental health side of it. And go back to the Dan Dosa episode, and I'll leave a link for that in our show notes, aroundthelayout.com/252. What did you discover regarding all of this in your research?
Well, I mean, it all starts with the science behind why we do what we do. So modelers are different from other hobbyists. It's not a compliment. It's not an insult. It's just an observation. The commitment that we have to get things right is unlike any other community I've encountered. I mean, I've met people who can identify a locomotive from half a mile away, people that spend 6 months researching the exact shade of a 1940s grain elevator before they even touch a paintbrush, people who spend a full weekend on a single tree. I've been that person. I suspect you have too.
Been there, done that, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to see what's actually going on here. What's the hobby doing to people to create this level of devotion? So I put this course together, and this course is called Why Do We Model? It's the first course at Miniprints University. And I think that if we understand a little bit more about what we're doing and why we're doing it, it will have benefits. I think, and I just want to say the reason for this is, I think there's really practical, by thinking about this, I think there's really practical ways it'll inform the way we model. I think that we will model more often. I think our modeling sessions will run deeper. I think we'll finish more projects. I know that layouts will improve. And definitely, I think that if we explore this, we will enjoy it more. So I should probably also clearly state right now that everything that we're talking about today is educational. It's not intended to provide medical or mental health advice. So I'm going to be talking a lot about the science that I discovered. And as an aside, I presented what I'm talking to you about today at the clinic in Chattanooga, as we mentioned. And I had 3 medical doctors in the audience. And one of them came up to me at the end and said, this is amazing. We learned all this stuff in residency 30 years ago, and I'd forgotten it. And, you hit it bang on. Another medical doctor came up to me and said, you got the science about 80% right, but overall, I'd give it 100%. So, if you're experiencing depression or other mental health concerns, please talk to a doctor or a qualified mental health professional. I call myself Dr. Mini, but no, I'm not a real doctor. I just play one on the internet. If there are any real psychologists, psychiatrists, or medical doctors listening to this, chime in, with comments, and they're the people that are really doctors. I am a model railroad hobbyist that asked the question why and went on a little journey of discovery and found out some interesting things. But I just want to clearly state, that caveat at the very beginning.
Yeah, that's a great disclaimer, and make sure that you do. Mental health is so important regardless, and we're big advocates of getting the help you need. We've had some really great people that are in the mental health field as part of the podcast. I'm thinking of Dan Dosa and Joe Mame among others. Definitely reach out, get the help, and talk to somebody. I talk to somebody, and why not you? So
yeah, mental health is health.
Absolutely. So with that said, knowing that Dr. Mini doesn't have a prescription pad and doesn't actually have his MD yet, maybe you'll work on that. In your spare time, you can work on your MD.
Fair enough.
What did you learn in this fun educational research project?
So there are basically 5 things I learned. I learned about flow. I learned about what the hobby is doing to our mental health. I also learned about what the hobby is doing to our physical health. I learned about something called mastery, and I learned why community is so important. Ray, have you ever had the following experience? You sit down intending to do like one small tiny thing. Maybe you're just going to paint a couple of figures, finish a section of track, and then you look up and 3 hours have passed. Your coffee's cold, the house is quiet. You've just completely lost track of time. Does that sound familiar?
That sounds very familiar, yes.
What just happened is something called flow. And flow is a state of focused absorption where time distorts, your self-consciousness disappears, and your performance peaks. It's a real phenomenon, and it's fascinating. I think one of the things that is so interesting about flow and model railroading is that model railroading is perfectly designed to induce flow. And when that happens, something happens in your brain called transient hypofrontality. It sounds alarming, but it's actually wonderful. And it just means temporary reduced activity. And I learned that your prefrontal cortex, that's the part of your brain that's responsible for self-criticism, second-guessing, overthinking. The little voice that says, this looks terrible, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
That temporary dials down its activity and it goes quiet. Basically, it takes a nap. And when you're in flow, that part of your inner critic disappears. You're deep in the zone, your work feels effortless, and you come out of a session feeling like a different person. Now, flow is really interesting because when that critic takes a nap, you stop judging everything. You stop second guessing every decision and you just build. You're not fighting yourself anymore. Your work will actually get better. So that's interesting. Okay, flow is interesting. But then I went a little deeper. How often does the average person enter the flow state? Some people only experience flow a few times a week, and many people don't experience it at all. As model railroaders, we are able to produce flow naturally, repeatedly, and easily. So you don't need to be an expert. A lot of times, there are other ways to get into flow. So deep meditation can do it, certain forms of prayer, elite athletic performance, playing a musical instrument at a very high level. These are all people that can get into flow state. And I'll mention why flow is so healthy for you in a moment. But a lot of these require years of training or specific conditions, that you can't just do on a Tuesday evening. Model railroading is unique and unusual because it produces that flow easily and accessibly. So you don't need to be an expert to get there. Flow is extremely, extremely beneficial for your health. When you enter flow state, your inner critic, as we mentioned, goes quiet. But here's the interesting thing, and we'll talk about this as well. Cortisol drops. That's your stress hormone. That's fight or flight. Your heart rate settles. Dopamine and norepinephrine, I love that one. So those are the brain's focus and motivation chemicals. They're released. And afterward, people just report feeling more confident and more positive about their lives. So I learned all about this thing called flow. And flow is something that most, I think, model railroaders will recognize and have experienced. And it's really, really good for us.
I've heard model railroaders talk about it in maybe a different term, not using the word flow, but zone, right? Like they got in the zone. Like, hey, how'd you knock all this out? How did you get all this scenery done? It was like, I just got in the zone. Like I just felt like I was in the zone and just started knocking all this out. And next thing I know, I had all the track work laid, or I had all the scenery done, or I had ballast put in, or whatever the case may be. So I've heard that term used before. And I believe, we're all chasing that, right? We all want to get into that zone or that flow. And like you said, it's great to know different methods to be able to get into that and work on doing it more often.
Well, and that's the interesting thing too, because that's the practical application. So once we've identified flow and recognized that it's beneficial, the next question is, okay, so how do we do it? So the nice thing about flow is that there are things that you can do that makes it more likely that you will go into flow, get into the zone. And that's exactly what it is. Getting into the zone is going into flow. So the things that I identified from the research, and this is all from the medical literature, and that I cover in the, why do we do this course, is you can protect your bench time. You can schedule a time to go down and work on the layout. Eliminating distractions is critically important. You need to put your phone in another room because it's easy as it is to sort of get into flow. It's even easier to be bumped out of flow. One distraction, one interruption resets your cognitive on-ramp, and it takes about 20 minutes to rebuild that deep focus once you've been pulled out of it. So protect your bench time, eliminate your distractions. Interestingly, one of the conditions to get into flow is to set a specific goal. And the goal has to be hard enough that it's challenging, but easy enough that it's achievable. So you don't want to necessarily say, I'm going down to work on the layout. You want to say, I'm going on down to build 3 trees, something like that. I was amazed to learn that you can create a ritual that will, I guess, trick your body or trick your mind or encourage your mind to go into flow. So if you make a specific drink, a cup of tea, play a playlist, put on, mixed 80s, whatever, jazz, lay your tools out in a specific order, that signals to your brain over time that it's time to shift into the focused state. So there are all these little tricks that you can do that will say to your brain, hey, guess what? It's time to enter flow. And you can engineer these sessions. I found that fascinating.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. I'm wondering, for you, after all this research, is there ways that you have found to get yourself into flow?
Absolutely. And I think the big one for me is distractions, because like a lot of model railroaders, I suffer from the squirrel syndrome, which I think medical researchers would probably call ADHD or I don't know, what specifically it is, but I am checking email, checking messages. When you run a business, it's very easy to wear 10 hats at the same time. One of the reasons that I don't model as much anymore is that there's always a squirrel, running down a tree or a fire to put out. So one of the things that I've identified, if I want to experience joy and the health benefits and enter flow, then I need to schedule a weekly time with no distractions where I'm just going to work on my modules.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I personally have been medically diagnosed with ADHD, and I'm under treatment for that. And I feel that too. And for a quick description of mine, it's like somebody's at times just changing the channel all the time in my head. It's a constant click, 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 and amongst other things. But yeah, one of the things that helps me combat it is, again, like you talked about, having that plan, write out what you need to be doing or what you want to be doing, set time blocks. It takes a little bit more discipline, but when you do it and then you execute it, it's euphoria. It feels so good to be able to do that. And it's such a break on your brain.
It is. And there is the exciting thing is that anecdotally we can talk about this, but there is so much And I'll get to some of the studies in a moment. There's so much research on this topic, and there is so much proof that basically building model trains is essentially the same as doing drugs. Now, it's considerably more expensive, but unlike drugs, it makes you better at the thing that quiets that internal critic, which means the effect of doing this is going to compound over time, so that makes you feel good that you talk about. It actually changes your brain. It rewires your neural pathways. And, in my clinic, I said, it's better than drugs. I mean, neurochemically, there is similar brain chemistry to certain drugs. But in my clinic, I said, unlike drugs, it makes you better, and the effect compounds over time rather than requiring escalating doses. And the entire room started laughing. No, we need more. So, there's a lot of studies that really go into this. And I want to talk about a couple of them because I find it fascinating. You can get a lot more of this in the online course. And at the end of the podcast, I'll give your listeners a code to get in and get the entire lesson. It's 9 courses, about 90 minutes worth of video content for free. So you don't have to take notes, Ray. You'll get all of this in much more detail at the end.
That's great news.
But I have peer-reviewed research to back up the comments I'm making. So stay with me. So a longitudinal study followed 19,134, to be exact, Americans over the age of 50 for 2 years, and found that people who regularly engaged in hobbies were significantly less likely to develop depression, even after you control for age, income, health status, all the things like that. That's not one study. That's not a niche finding. There's so much evidence that hobbies are genuinely good for human health. And they're consistent whether you look at mental health, physical health, longevity. They hold up, as I mentioned, if you control for all these other variables. There is one that was particularly interesting, and it's in a journal called Frontiers in Public Health. In 2024, they found that the impact of crafting, and I'll define crafting in a moment, on people's sense that their life is worthwhile was greater than the impact of being employed. So think about that. Crafting, and they define crafting as sort of making things, had a bigger positive effect on people's sense of purpose than having a job.
I think the word you just said is so important, purpose. And I think that just drives everything. In my mind, and I'd love to get your take on this, I put purpose right at the top of pretty much everything. We're very purpose-driven people. And whether if I'm analyzing why we model railroad or why we operate or why we do the things that we do, man, purpose just seems to go right to the top of the list.
Absolutely. And we also saw that as part of doing the research for this clinic. I sent a questionnaire out to the miniprints miniverse, and I had over 350 responses to this. And this was like long written out text. This wasn't on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel? This was paragraphs. I mean, I have hundreds and hundreds. I would even probably say close to thousands of pages of responses from people that explain exactly what the hobby does for them. And people got incredibly personal. I mean, some of them gave me permission to share, and they're all covered in the course. But people talked about cancer diagnoses. They talked about the death of a spouse. They talked about social isolation. I mean, I was amazed at how personal and important people found this, and shared. It really was. It was unbelievable. It really was. I was speechless and honestly a little choked up, when people were talking about what this hobby did for them. I mean, the thing about depression, I guess, or things like that is there's a term I learned called behavioral activation, where depression or low mood or negative thoughts, whatever you want to call it, has a self-reinforcing cycle. You feel low, you do less, you have fewer moments of pleasure, which deepens a low, which makes you want to do even less. And this hobby acts as a circuit breaker for that cycle. I go deep into that, in the course. I talk about reward chemistry and rumination interruption and upward spiral and, all sorts of things that are covered in the course that, that are, that we don't need to go into detail now. But what I did find, the impact here is that starting something is what makes you feel better. The clinical finding from all of these researches, all the studies I read, and I can distill it down for the listeners very simply as a practical to do. And the practical to do is behavior drives mood, not the other way around. So if life is hard and working on the layout feels like a luxury that you haven't earned, go downstairs. Not after things settle down, right now. The layout isn't a reward for having dealt with difficult things. It's a tool for dealing with them. And that came through time and time again. Basically, keep calm and play with trains is what I'm saying.
What is the big mood changer of model railroading in particular, do you believe?
Okay, so first off, I have to say that a lot of the findings here are general to all hobbies. I think there are some unique findings to model railroading. One of the things that's really interesting about model railroading is how accessible it is. There are other hobbies, like sports, golf, things like that, take a ton of skill and time and practice. Anyone can pretty much pick up and make a diorama or a scene or model railroading. Model railroading is very accessible. One of the interesting things too was a lot of these findings, doesn't matter skill level. You don't have to be good at something to derive the benefits from it. You just have to pick it up and do it. And model railroading is accessible. It's easy. It's fun. It's also a hobby where there are so many different aspects to it that there's really something there for everyone. They call it the world's greatest hobby. If you're an electrician and you're interested in electrical or scenery, it's a really unique hobby because of the number of disciplines. It's almost a universal, everything hobby. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is great if you're, interested in bird watching as a hobby or knitting or crocheting or whatever hobby that is. But there are some unique things. But basically what I learned, and this sounds a little medical, but I think it's important, is that you have an autonomic nervous system. That's the part of your nervous system that runs, all the involuntary things, heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, things that you don't think about. And these are two systems that run in parallel, but they oppose each other. So you've got the sympathetic system, that's fight or flight. We talked about that a minute ago. That's the gas pedal. That's cortisol. When your brain detects any kind of threat, a deadline, a difficult conversation, tariffs, financial stress, a bad news cycle, fight or flight floods your system with cortisol. That raises your heart rate, it constricts your blood vessels, and your body prepares to fight or run. I felt that very much when I was giving the clinic, that sense of, oh my God, your body just goes into sort of like, what am I doing here? I'm talking to all these people. There are, people in this room that might think I'm, insane, that this isn't interesting. Happily, that wasn't the case. So when delivering a podcast, a clinic, or something like that, the sympathetic system engages. Here's the thing about the sympathetic system. When you're in fight or flight, when your foot is on the gas pedal, that's important. That has evolved to save your life. If you are running from the cave bear, if you are in genuine physical danger, it does it brilliantly. The problem is that in this modern life, the world that you and I live in, Ray, we're running it constantly on low all day to respond to things that don't actually require fight or flight. So we are constantly in this state of cortisol. And that wears your body down. It wears it down in ways that are really bad for cardiovascular health. This is why. So this is the nugget of why all of these studies say, quite simply, if you have a hobby, if you're a model railroader, you will live longer. Think of it as a hose. If you are pumping high pressure water through a hose all the time, 24/7, full pressure, that hose is going to burst. Well, in this case, the hose is your cardiovascular system. The water being pumped through is your blood pressure, and cortisol and stress is doing that to you. But the second state is the parasympathetic system. This is the rest and repair, the break. So this is the opposite. It's still part of your autonomic nervous system, but instead of being in fight or flight, you can be in rest and repair. So when you're sleeping, for example, when your heart rate settles, your blood pressure drops, and your body gets to do the recovery and repair work, that's where you start to see the benefits. And that's what model railroading and flow and all of these studies are showing. So, we're not being chased by a tiger. We're responding to emails. We're stuck in traffic. We're worrying about financial situations. Our bodies can't tell the difference between a real emergency and a stressful Tuesday. And when that alarm is ringing all day long, every day, at emergency speed, the risk of heart disease and negative physical complications go up. There was one study that I found that says 75% of participants showed a significant reduction in cortisol levels after making art. Making art is just defined as creating. And it doesn't matter how good you are. You don't need to be, a top level modeler or artist to do this. Just the mere act of making reduces cortisol, reduces stress. And this was, there was a ton of studies that I found. There are, I've got pages on this. A peer-reviewed study of 1,400 participants from 19 to 89 showed that regular hobby engagement, doesn't matter which hobby, in our case, model railroading, is associated with lower resting blood pressure. Now, that's like lower resting. That means a reduction in blood pressure over time. So go back to the garden hose. If you're not running on full power all the time, you will basically live longer. You will be in better shape. And that's what the model railroading is doing to us on a physical level. It's taking us out of that cortisol-induced fight or flight, stressful, heart rate elevated daily life and giving us something where our brain shuts down, the critical element turns off, we go into a rest and repair state, and we do things that are measurably good for our bodies.
Yeah, who the heck knew model railroading was so good for us health-wise? I mean, we talk about mental, and there's you get the physical and the mental, and they tie together. And I know it's mentally good, but physically good is really an interesting new piece for me.
It is, and this is why I found it fascinating. And I was terrified that I was the only one that found it fascinating. But I have had 185 people go through this course since I launched it in Chattanooga. I guess a month ago. Yeah, almost exactly a month ago. And the comments have been spectacular. The comments are unreal. If you go to the miniprints website and you look at the Why Do We Model page, there are reviews. Great, well done, really interesting. I enjoyed the challenge of making something real looking as possible. It keeps me young. It's been an eye-opener for me and my wife. When I talk to her, I've enjoyed everything so far. This is a really great introspective course. I began thinking that I had not thought about my modeling in those terms. I enjoyed it. I mean, people are really responding to this message. And that reduces my cortisol, I'll tell you that for sure, because I wasn't sure, if this would be of interest. But it is. So there's lots and lots that we can look at. We can look at mastery and we can look at community. I want to just end on community. That's, lesson 6 in the 9 lessons, because I found this at the convention. We were surrounded by people who understand something about us that most people in our lives don't. Community in the model railroad community. Whether you're a member of a club, listening to this podcast, being a member of, the Around the Layout or miniprints Facebook groups, That's all community. There are different ways to get community. And a large scale study found that social isolation is associated with a 29% increased risk of early mortality. Science's way of saying you're going to die. The US Surgeon General described the health impact of loneliness, and they're calling loneliness an epidemic. The US Surgeon General described the health impact of loneliness as comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So, one of the things that model railroading gives us is community, and that connection matters. And the connection matters for some of the same physical reasons that we talked about a minute ago. That same rest and repair mechanism. If you were alone in the past, you were probably dead. The saber-toothed tiger was going to get you. We are a social being. We evolved, and a lot of this is evolutionary biology. We evolved in groups to protect ourselves, and our body still feels loneliness as a physical threat. So one of the things that I found particularly interesting is that this wild, crazy community, this friendship that we have, Ray, is also doing really positive things for our mind and our body. And, you knew that, I knew that, but now what we have with all of these studies that I go through is the scientific proof that model railroading will indeed save your life.
Yeah, it's about finding your people, isn't it? And I think that's a big part of it as well, that know that you're not alone, even if you're in a isolated hobby. Usually it's our basements or a train room or a shed, and we're usually by ourselves doing it. But even this mentality of knowing there's other people out there like me, I'm not by myself, or I'm not alone in the way I think or feel about this is a huge reinforcement.
Absolutely. Community is I think my favorite part of this hobby. And I think a lot of model railroaders, and I found this in the study, talked about community and the importance of community, like-mindedness, as you say, finding your people, being part of the tribe. That came through so clearly, both in the research and in the survey. That's really why I started miniprints University, just to come full circle. miniprints University, and this Why Do We Model is the first course in miniprints University, is what comes next. It's an educational platform that I'm building for modelers who want to go deeper, not deeper into the technique that we talked about, but deeper into the thinking and the science behind the hobby. Why do we model? That's the first course. And, that, as I said, is available for a limited time, free to all of your listeners. If you go to miniprints.com and you search for Why Do We Model, just type in why or Why Do We Model, the course will come up. You can check out, and if you enter the code Y, WHY, you will get that as a downloadable online course for free.
And we'll share the link to that again in our show notes, aroundthelayout.com/252.
But miniprints University is not ending with the Why Do We Model course. That's just the first one. So I want to share a little bit of another exclusive here with you. I've not talked about this publicly before, but I'm actively working on our second course. And our second course is called See Like an Artist, Think Like a Storyteller. So Why Do We Model answers the question of why you keep coming back to the bench. But there's a second question that most modelers they're never taught to ask. Not why do you model, but how do you see? So See Like an Artist, Think Like a Storyteller is going to go into the thinking and the science behind what separates the best layouts in this hobby from the layouts that we're building. So unlike the first one that I taught, this one is all taught by guest lecturers. So we've got Tom Johnson, you know Tom, from his wonderful Cass County. Pele Soberg is teaching it. There's a fantastic modeler in the UK named Rob Clark. So this will be fantastic, world-renowned expert guest lecturers talking about how they see their layouts and how they think about them. And I don't think, that there's much technique separating them from us. I think it's the way they approach it and look at it and think about it that's the next topic I want to delve into.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's really a great dive into a little bit more beyond the how, the why. And even with your next clinic, See Like an Artist, Think Like a Storyteller, you're getting into still a why. I mean, there's a little bit, obviously, the how do they see, but that's a really big why driven part. And that really just circle why. And that's really where a crux of where the model railroading comes from. The how is just all in techniques, and there's a multitude of different techniques. And it's always fun to even ask on that why. Why do you do it that way?
Absolutely. Miniprints University is not about how-to techniques. I think YouTube covers that brilliantly. I think there's a lot of content on there. Miniprints University is a platform that's going to ask why. Why do we do what we do? Why do we think the way we think? And all of the goal of this is to make us better modelers. I do believe that if you understand the why, we will enjoy it more, we will do it more, we will get better results. And that's some of the interesting areas to explore that, from my perspective, no one is talking about, or very few people anyway are talking about. I mean, I started Miniprints because, as I mentioned before, I wanted an HO scale beaver for my own model railroad layout. And it grew into this 6-year business, this adventure I'm on. I feel the same with Miniprints University. Answer questions that interest me, and happily, the community seems to find that of interest as well.
We mentioned at the top of the show that Dr. Mini is not an MD, but maybe Dr. Mini PhD. You're starting to head towards something there, Bernard. You got a lot of great information there, and awesome that you shared it. And love the fact that you brought up community, because that ties into our question of the month. The question of the month is, what has the model railroading community given you beyond the hobby itself? We had 6 folks that went to aroundthelayout.com/question and submitted their answers. We're going to listen to them now. We're going to start with Brian Sopke.
Hi, Ray. This is Brian Sopke with the Benton and Southern Railroad in Sandy, Oregon. For the question of the month, what has the model railroad community given me beyond the hobby itself? First and foremost, the camaraderie, the friendships, and the people I've gotten to meet, and the layouts I've gotten to see, and the skills I've learned from these people has been absolutely invaluable in my own process of learning and participating in the hobby. The other thing is new skills such as weathering and electrical work for DCC, things of that nature. Overall, the community is just absolutely invaluable. Hope you have a great day, and thanks.
I think that Brian hits on a great point of getting out there and sharing this information. I love to say that the hobby is so much better shared. And I understand a lone wolf modeler who likes to kind of privately enjoy their hobby. But when you get out of the basement or the train shed or the train room or wherever you're doing your modeling, and you get out and you start having these conversations, you become a better modeler by sharing what you know and hearing what they have. And it just starts to build this entire snowball that just continues to build.
I agree. And one of the questions that I received that I need to delve deeper into is, people said, well, if I am a lone wolf modeler, and that did come up, am I not getting the results of community? Listening to this podcast is community. So right. Community can still be a somewhat, I know it sounds funny, but community can be a solitary thing. Everyone who's listening to this right now, Ray, is part of our community, is part of this community.
That's a great point. Let's take a listen to Mark Steenwick.
My name is Mark Steenwick from the Kansas City area, and my answer to the question of the month is pretty simple. It has brought me a lot of friends from all over the country. It's amazing the amount of people from different walks of life that you meet through the model railroad hobby. Thanks again.
Yeah, and that's one other point too, isn't it, Bernard? It's beyond model railroading that you start to learn when you build this community. It becomes life relationships.
Absolutely. And the thing that, going back to it, that I found so interesting, it's doing such incredible things for us physically and mentally. I mean, of course, everyone knows that it's great to have friends and community, but I had no idea how deep this really went. And it's so important. I mean, we're saving each other here, right?
That's cool. What a powerful thing to be able to think about, right? That, we're actually helping each other beyond just a scene or track laying. It's helping people on a much deeper level.
If you go back 10,000 years, we are literally sitting around a campfire, eating our woolly mammoth and sharing stories about the hunt. This is as basic as it gets. This is what the human being was wired to do.
All right, let's head over to Dennis Colucci.
Hey, all, my name is Dennis Colucci from Hopewell Junction, New York. And besides the hobby itself, the model railroading community has really given me a sense of accomplishment and pride in what I do, and honestly built my confidence a lot. It's very scary at first sharing something that you put a lot of work and effort into, but the people that I've met in the hobby have been fantastic and have really uplifted me and made me feel really confident in what I do and confident in who I am, to the point where I'm very happy to share things online as I work on them. So that sense of pride and accomplishment really has grown out of getting to know the people in the modeling community and really putting myself out there in the community. So, and part of that is thanks to you, Ray. So thanks for the show, and can't wait to hear the next episode.
Well, Dennis, my pleasure, and thank you for submitting your answer for the question of the month. And Dennis brings up a thing that you had mentioned, I know about, and it's putting yourself out there. It is not easy. You talked about your clinic and the feelings that you were getting as you were putting on this clinic, and Dennis mentions it there. I feel it quite often. I feel it quite often in public and behind the podcast. It takes a lot to put yourself out there into the court of public opinion and everything else. Talk about how you've been able to get over that, Bernard.
Well, we didn't talk about mastery, but I'm so glad Dennis brought this up, because that's the entire chapter on mastery. And it's got a name in psychology. It's called self-efficacy. And there is a whole bunch of research that in the course that talks about mastery experiences and what that does. I mean, basically, every time you solve a hard problem on your layout, which he talked about, every time you nail a technique that you've been struggling with, every time you finish something that you feel, quiet pride, and he talked about that, you make a deposit into your self-efficacy account. You basically prove to yourself that you are capable. And the more capable you prove to yourself, and this echoes all things, like, because you can make a nice tree, that doesn't just mean that in your brain you're like, hey, I'm good at trees. That means that you are a capable, efficient, effective human being. And that evidence echoes forward. So people who challenge themselves in the hobby tend to be more resilient in life. And you tend to file it not under model railroading specifically, but you file it under me. Like, I can do this. So every success makes you more successful. And what it does for me when I go down and I lay a piece of track, or I teach myself electrical, because I hate electrical. It's the worst part of the hobby for me. But when I wire a turnout and it actually works, I'm like, hey, I did something. I did a thing. And it makes me feel confident, and it makes me feel happy. And the science says that the next time I approach something, it doesn't matter what it is, maybe installing a window air conditioning unit, which I did this week in the move, I draw on that sense of self-efficacy, that sense of I can do this, and it builds over time. You're depositing into your bank account of doing things making me better. So that's what it's done for me. I'm a lot of little successes help you with the next challenge. So, for me, standing up in front of a group of people, while the cortisol does spike, because that's just normal fight or flight, the act of building a model railroad will make you more confident. And the more you do it, the better you get.
Absolutely. Just keep doing it and learn as you go.
Absolutely. It's a brilliant point Dennis made, and it's supported by the science.
You said your next trip you were going to drive, but we're heading to Australia and we got to fly to do that. So here we go. We're heading to New South Wales.
Paul Casser from Sydney, Australia. What has the model railroading community given me beyond the hobby itself? Well, it's given me quite a lot, considering Ray and I have become really good friends, and a number of other people in the community. Good friend Justin Mitchell, that's organised Sydney RPM. I consider him a good friend, plus many others, too many to name. The biggest thing that it's given me, I think, is the fact that not just a hobby, but I'm also involved in the podcast and a number of other things like the Sydney RPM. Gives me more things to do, certainly in my retirement. Had I not had the model railroading community, I don't know what I would do, because I spend a lot of time socialising, talking about the hobby, enjoying the hobby, and it's a substantial part of my life.
Yeah, we talked a lot about this on the episode we did with Dan Dosa as far as the tie-in between mental health, model railroading, and retirement. And retirement is a big part of people's lives. You and I aren't there yet, but we've seen people go through that retirement phase. And I know a lot of people in our hobby are in that retirement phase. And changing routines, we talked about that earlier, developed routines. Now it's completely different. It's so important for that to be established to keep the mental and physical health going in those latter years.
100%. And what an enjoyable way of spending time too. I mean, the thing about this hobby, and I will include things like rail fanning, which I really enjoy doing, in the hobby. The researching, we talked about earlier, I was researching the rail history of the new building that I've moved into. I mean, my goodness, it is endless. The list of projects and rabbit holes that we could go down, it's a spectacular way to spend time. I mean, I, for one, look forward to retirement. I'm not sure I'll ever get there, but it's a lovely goal.
Absolutely. All right, let's stay on the plane. Let's head to Switzerland.
Hi, Ray and friends of the ATLP podcast. This is Robin from Switzerland. So for this month's question, what the community has given me beyond the hobby itself, I will go with two things. So number one would be friendship. There are so many great people in the hobby that I've been able to meet, and a lot of them have become very good friends of mine. And then number two, I will go with support. So the support that I have been able to get from those people in the hobby is absolutely amazing. There are so many talented people. Some do weathering, some do amazing bench work, some have real good information about the prototype. And in this hobby, what I think one of the things that I like the most is the fact that we all get together, we share our knowledge, we support each other, we help to build stuff, to paint stuff. And I think this is one of the coolest and best aspects for me on a personal level. What the hobby and the community gives me is this amazing level of support. And I think this is something unique within this hobby and something that I like the most. So keep up the great show and have a great day, everybody.
Well, thank you, Robin. And, a lot of reiterated points there. And as I'm listening to this, I just think about community. Thank goodness for all of this awesome technology. I mean, we're talking right now between Connecticut and Toronto, and we have folks that we're connecting with all over the globe now with the technology and the reach of all of that. So community, not just within where you live, it's a worldwide thing.
It is, absolutely. And that's why it's so important to get together with like-minded individuals and share. And there's so many benefits that come from that community, above and beyond just the modeling.
And we'll wrap it up with Sam Dickinson.
Hi, Ray. Sam Dickinson from Evansville, Indiana. If I had to name one thing the community has given me, that is helping me get out of my shell. I am autistic, and despite my childhood being full of talking to anyone and everyone, my adult years have been rather antisocial. Unless it was local or someone was inviting me and offering me a ride, I really would not go anywhere for anything. I wouldn't go to conventions or operating sessions or shows or anything. But over the past few years, that started to change. I've joined some online groups such as the Model Train People and, of course, Operating Crew here at ATLP. I've started to go to conventions and events like St. Louis RPM, and I've even joined the NMRA, and I've started to make some connections there. And I'm going to operating sessions throughout the area. And all of this has helped me not just develop as a modeler, but also as a human being, because these are helping me get used to talking to people that I don't know and just getting me to connect with people in general, which are things that I desperately need as a functioning adult. Hope this answers your question. Look forward to hearing the other answers, and I hope you all have a great day.
Thanks, Sam, and thank you for being so candid and sharing what is going on with you, because it's so relatable to so many more people than you actually believe or know. And I listened to things that Sam just said, Bernard, and there's some check boxes for me. Would you believe that I'm actually feel more introverted than extroverted, even though I own a microphone and do a podcast? But I am, and it does, and you got to push yourself. And it sounds like Sam's doing a great job of pushing in those boundaries and those limits that we talk about.
And this is, first of all, what a powerful testimonial, what a powerful statement, answer to the question. That's what I meant before when I said I couldn't believe how heartfelt and detailed and open people were to the questionnaire. People really do want to talk about this topic. This is powerful. Model railroading is doing things to and for people. It's changing lives. And this is why I am so excited by this topic, because it's a topic that interests the two of us, but it's resonating with people. People are, talking about the benefits of this hobby, and it's a conversation I love having, and it's worth having.
Thank you to everyone who submitted their answer to the question of the month. If you'd like to hear yourself here on Around the Layout podcast, head to aroundthelayout.com/question. There you'll find the current question of the month. Read below, press the button, record your answer. You may just hear yourself on Around the Layout podcast. Bernard, give us a little bit of a rundown on where we can find more on Miniprints University and, of course, miniprints.com itself.
Miniprints.com, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of model railroad details, people, animals, as I'm sure your listeners are familiar with. There is a miniverse of minis at miniprints.com. If you go to miniprints.com and you go to the little search bar and you type why do you model, you will see a link to the first course. It's priced at $49, but for your audience, all 9 lessons, 90 minutes of video content, all of these things that we talked about in much greater detail are free when you check out with the code WHY. WHY. I think it's something that people will enjoy. And I definitely look forward to the launch of our second course, See Like an Artist, Think Like a Storyteller, which I hope to have out within a month. And more ideas. If anyone has a topic that they would like to explore, Bernard@miniprints.com is my email. If anyone has any suggestions, ideas. This week, I'm going to be setting up the new studio in the new space. And then hopefully as of September 1st, back to printing miniatures in earnest.
Awesome stuff. We'll share all the links that Bernard just mentioned in our show notes aroundthelayout.com/252. Bernard, always great catching up with you. Thank you so much for coming by and telling us all about model railroading for the soul.
And while I have to reiterate one last thing, I am not a doctor. I play one on the internet. I will leave you, Ray, and your listeners with a prescription. The prescription is simple. Go model.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.